So what kind of influences do you have that have, I'm assuming, based because it's the fantasy I was reading on your website, Tolkien's probably a big one. But what kind of influences do you have with your story?
So, at the risk of sounding very unoriginal, my first franchise obsession that I can remember way back in the day was the original Star Wars trilogy. I watched it pretty young, and I was so like enamored with just the Jedi and just the scope of the world building, and it was fantasy and space, so I thought it was really cool. I was Princess Leia was like my idol for so long,
Hmm.
and I think getting that was my first experience getting lost in a world and wanting to recreate that for myself again and again and for others. So
Hmm.
from there, it kind of, ballooned out into a lot of other interests. Reading Lord of the Rings was definitely a huge one, but it was actually a bit later in life. I would say when I was younger, it was a lot more actually probably in the sci-fi space, ironically. And then very adventure-y. There were certain video games that I would play, and I've always been into like more of the story than anything else. But yeah, reading Tolkien's a huge one. I really love a lot of classic literature, and so it's kind of interesting because I feel like the more wide read that I've become, the more wide read you are, it allows you to really bring unique things to the genre like of your choosing. So
Hmm.
I've always tried to read as broadly as possible and consume content as broadly as possible because I think there's something to be learned for so many different types of storytelling mediums and genres.
Hmm.
Uh, but yeah, video games also influence a lot of my writing. I'm a huge fan of Skyrim,
Hmm.
and I love Horizon Zero Dawn and some of those more expansive ones that have all of these lore kind of interwoven. And I think that's a huge part. Is just I love a good story with a good world. Like I want to feel like this is a place that exists fully in my head because I think that's what creates that immersion for me.
Yeah. Is world building kind of like a character to you? Because that's kind of, you hear a lot about, if you look at like a lot of traditional writing advice type things, you hear, people will say like, well, don't info dump too much and don't,
Mhm.
focus so much on the world building up front because you want people, and some of that is obviously true and a good advice, but at the same time, like for me, like I love world building, so I'm never like having a problem with a big info dump or something because I just like
Yeah,
it. So is world building to you kind of a character in the story? Like, does it play that kind of a role?
I think world building is kind of blanketing everything. So the way I look at it is everything comes from the characters in the world building, but the characters are influenced by their world. Like without
Mhm.
their world, they're not the same characters that I'm writing in the story or that we're reading. Luke isn't who Luke would be in A New Hope if he hadn't been this, desolate farmer's boy on this abandoned kind of crappy desert planet. And so much of that, I guess, in that sense, the world is a character, but it's also the story. So
Mhm.
for me, I can't go into any writing project without knowing a lot about my world. And I guess in that sense, I'm a strong plotter in the sense that I need to know the place that I'm in. And I think again, it comes back to that immersion, but it also comes back to your characters because all of their decisions and their goals and their dreams, it's completely shaped by the world they live in, just like we're shaped by our circumstances and our world. So
Mhm.
I think the key is to know everything you possibly can about it, but to sprinkle it in naturally into the story. And I think it actually does happen when you know a lot about your world. And I think when people kind of confuse info dumping with, when I think it depends like how much is done at once. And sometimes you do need to know a lot to kind of set the stage. But what I try to do is just gradually reference it throughout like the story. So it's not so much at once, but it's just, you'll catch something here and there as your character's noticing and navigating through their world and drop a bit here. But I love all the juicy world building details for sure. I think it's what makes it feel lived in.
Mhm. We're very similar in that I find that like generally when I get stopped up, like if I'm writing and I'm just like I don't know how to keep going, it's never really, most of the time, I'd say, 90% of the time, it's never like a story plot point. It's generally because I'm like I don't know how the magic system works right now, or I don't know how this like thing, it's like a world building thing that's like, I know what I want the story to do, but like the game mechanics don't make sense. So I don't know how to
Yes.
get it there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's so relatable because yeah, that a lot of time that stops me too. I'll get to a point and it's the question of, okay, maybe I've never done this work on my character. So what is true about this part in her world? Or, oh, I never thought about this particular event for this particular culture at this particular time in history and how it's going to influence everything. So no matter how prepared I am, there's always a lot of uncovering that's done as you're writing because those questions pop up that you didn't think to ask yourself, a couple of paragraphs back.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't know until you try to write it. And then it's like, I don't know how this works, So how, when it comes to world building or even character, I guess really anything writing related, what would you say are some of your strengths as a writer, and then maybe some of your weaknesses? Like, what are your, like, I really do this really well, or like, these are the things I struggle with.
According to my reviews, everyone loves the world building. So
Perfect.
I guess that's probably one of my strengths because it is so important to me. It's probably the thing I'm the most hyper fixated on. So that's a huge one. I think I'm good at, I guess, taking a character and making sure that they have some growth and a journey. That's another important thing to me in storytelling. And there are certain stories where it works like an episodic style storytelling, like Sherlock Holmes doesn't need to go through crazy character arcs because that's not what his story's about. It's about the mystery, where I think, at least in the stories that I'm writing that are, despite having big plots that they're more character driven. So I spend a lot of time just asking myself, does this ring true? So whether that's situational, the world, or the characters, I really strive for realism, which sounds ironic, writing epic fantasy and it's set in a secondary world, but I think that realism needs to be there. I also really enjoy dialogue, and I think that probably comes a bit from the acting background. Is I feel like dialogue is really important to me. It flows so much easier for me than a lot of the other parts of my writing. I could just picture the characters clearly and picture their exchanges. Sometimes I get up and I kind of like walk around and act it out before I actually sit and type the dialogue. One thing that I struggle with that took me a long time with my first book, at least. I went through 12 drafts of A Thieves and Shadows over about 5 years. And one thing that I really had to work at was taking what I saw so clearly in my head and making sure that that was clear to the readers. Because I think when you get super close to your work and you've been living with your characters and you've been living with your story, that, it's second nature to you. So I don't feel like, I know what this looks like in my head. This is enough of a description. And then that's where beta readers or a critique partner comes in and saves the day, kind of reminding me like, oh, hey, I don't get what you're saying here. Or could you remind me like what this is? Because I tend to just assume the intelligence of all of my readers. I'm like, people figure this out as they go. But sometimes I'm a little too, I guess, not on the nose enough with certain things. So that's something that I'll try to catch in drafts, is to provide clarity a little more and like reference back to things, which is probably the hardest part of writing is, just getting out of your head and reminding yourself that you're doing this for other people and to look at it from their perspective. Since you don't have that live feedback at the time like you would with music or acting, it's kind of like that delayed buffering and then you get it back. So I can't stress the importance of early readers enough for that reason.
Yeah. It's the feedback loop for writing is really slow. Like it's, a lot of some things you can do the creative thing and then you get feedback right away really fast. Like writing is like, it takes you a long time to actually write it. And then by the time you give it to someone, even beta readers who are like supposed to, get on it and read it, you still gotta wait. So it's hard sometimes to get out of that, like, because it's not like you write something and then you immediately get feedback on whether or not something is working or not. And so I've my brother writes, and so we bounce a lot of things off each other. And I remember early on giving him some stuff, and he was just like, I don't really know what anything looks like. Like I kind of think I do, but I don't really know. Like I can't picture it in my head. And I was like, oh, okay, because I could see it, but then it's like, okay, I'm not actually telling you exactly what I think it looks like,
And that it's so hard because it's like so much of it is subjective too. Like you're going in and some people are like absolutely loving it, because it's more fast paced or because, there's no filler. And then you get the people commenting, I want all that. I want all those slow moments. I want the excessive details. I want the 1-page Martin style Westeros feast so I could picture all the food. And I think that's been one of the hardest things for me to balance, is just knowing when to take feedback and to change it, and also knowing when it's just subjective. And trying to find that balance of writing to your readership, but also staying true to what you want to write and the story you want to tell. I don't know if I'll ever figure it out.
Yeah, I think it's probably always just a balance, and you just kind of keep figuring it out as you go.